Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. I have with me tonight Tim Coker N6WIN. Tim designed and built the contest station ND7K in Arizona that has been instrumental in Dan Craig N6MJ's success. Dan has committed to operating exclusively from ND7K in his quest to qualify for the WRTC 2026. Tim reminds me of the Michael Jordan quote, "Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence wins championships." Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me again, Kevin.
I really enjoyed you joining the contest crew for the wrap-up of the CQ-WPX sideband, and certainly your name has come up a lot in the contest crew conversations regarding ND7K. But I'd like to get into, first of all, a little bit of your ham radio background. I'm pretty sure you're one of those guys that started off pretty young, maybe in your teens. Tell me about that.
Yes, at the age of 11, I was first licensed. My father was is still a ham radio operator, and my mother had become a ham radio operator, mainly because of my father's experience on our old sheriff's department. There was an earthquake in which many of the deputies were being called to respond. The Army was actually flying them over to the emergency zone, and most of the deputies were unable to contact their family units to let them know that they were okay, to check in on them, etc. And my father was able to, via, if I recall correctly, a 2-meter link up to a local mountaintop using the old auto patch system. So my mom was able to get a landline call in an unaffected area, and we were able to know that my father was going to be responding, that he was okay, and basically an open-ended timeline of when he'd be home. So that kind of stuck with me quite a bit. My mom got licensed. She then encouraged my brother and I to both be licensed, and we studied during the summer between school sessions and did the old novice route. I think I was licensed within months of my buddy Dan. We both have Check 89 call signs. I think he was a little younger than me, if I'm not mistaken, in getting his radio license. But all these years later, it's pretty easy in sweepstakes to use the correct check.
So 11 years old, you get your license. That's a pretty memorable experience. Were you active right away, and how long did it take you before you got involved with contesting?
If I recall correctly, I got right onto 2 meters, probably like many. However, I immediately got into HF, as I recall seeing my father work in HF. He had some small radio type setup in the den. Well, I remember one time in a closet, the typical probably ham that doesn't get the primary use of a room for his ham radio shack, has to share it with the family at probably the wife's direction. But nonetheless, I thought it was pretty neat that he was talking to folks all over the world with just a wire antenna or sometimes a very small trapped vertical in the backyard. And the wires would be just on the apex of the wire would be hooked up to the chimney type thing. So nothing special at all. But during that time, sunspots were high. And even with, I believe at first, an Alinco 25-watt type of radio, a mobile radio, we were able to get on 10 meters without wire, and even on sideband, make contacts throughout the world. So it was very early that I started getting into the magic of radio, reaching worldwide with very little power and antenna behind it.
And what about contesting?
So contesting, California QSO Party was the one that really bit the bug for me. It could be the DX in San Bernardino County. I remember, I still have a certificate on the wall for that one, my first contest that I was serious about, if you will. I probably made less than a few hundred Qs, but I remember thinking, wow, I placed third place for my county, and as a novice or technician at that time, whatever I may have been, to me, it was something else. And because I knew I was missing out on contest QSOs and also DX QSOs, that drove me to take the test for general and later advanced, I think the next summer, if I'm not mistaken. And at the time, I wasn't big into Morse code, although I should have been. And I did not go on to the extra class with the 20 words a minute at that time. Wasn't until many years later until I did. But that was, again, because of wanting to make sure that I wasn't missing out on mainly contesting cues, but also DXing.
So I'm trying to find the link between that modest beginning and starting to do some contesting to where you are today, because you clearly are incredibly competitive. You operated with KL9A in the CQWPX, and you guys did a great job. But you're also willing to put together a pretty state-of-the-art contest station there in Arizona. So at some point in your career and your hobby career, seems like a switch flipped. Do you remember what that was?
As a kid, going to Elmers houses, I had an opportunity to operate with a Kenwood TS950S at my first Elmers. He probably, if I recall correctly, had a 30-foot Roan of some sort and like a TH6. I thought that that was amazing. I remember very vividly the smell of cigarettes and a dank shack in a back room of some sort. Very cool. One of my favorite memories of coming up and learning, and just taking a 30-minute drive with my parents to go out and learn from somebody that my father knew from the local repeater who had more HF DX experience than he did. From there, I met a number of Elmers through local contest clubs and field day events, and got to get my hands on an amplifier and be able to drive an old Alpha, have rotating stuff even on 40 meters. And I started to understand that there was a lot more stuff out there on the radio that I wasn't hearing, regardless of what I had at home. The old adage that, if I can hear them, I can work them. It's very true until you start to understand that you don't really hear a whole lot without good equipment. And good receiving ears. So I started to realize through that that there was a lot more that was happening on the radio than what my father's home station was capable of hearing. And in college, I recall putting up a 50-foot tubular crank-up tower in his backyard. And I was so excited to have a very small Force 12 tri-bender, mono interlaced tri-bender at that time, and a 40-meter rotating dipole. From there, I got my opportunities to start working contests. Once I met Dan N6MJ, we were able to go down to Whiskey 6 Yankee Indias. And to me, Jim had put together a monster station, obviously, and he was winning many contests, putting together multis. And Dan qualified for WRTC from there, I believe, for 2012. So at that point in my time, I realized, that beverages and 80-meter Yagis that had switched relays and 4-element 40s up high and stacks of antennas, monobanders that were going to different directions was a very important thing. And I think a lot of people at that time weren't thinking about different directions, but Dan was pushing for it over there. And K6AM, John, and Jim W6YI were willing to try those things out and give Dan the reins and opportunity to try do different things. And he was being very successful. So at home around that time, I took some lessons from that. And I wanted to put up a stack of interlaced monobanders like C31s or the equivalent. And I knew that a C31 worked great at 54 feet on your typical crank up in a Southern California backyard from my Elmers. But I wanted to know, could I put two of them up? And what would that do if I fixed one on Europe where it's so hard to make QSOs? I knew that JA was easier from here. And a lot of people, kind of probably figured that on a crank up at 30 or 35 foot height at the top of the second section, that it might not really work well and you'll get a lot of interference from the house or neighbors, et cetera. But I was just like, well, why not try it? There's not a lot lost in that. It's just a rental of a scissor lift and some labor and material. You can always resell something. And so we did that, and it worked out pretty well, actually. Nothing like out here where the heights are higher. But I started putting together little receive antennas like the VE3DO receive loop that I could fit in my city backyard. And we even put up, if I recall correctly, just a driven element off of a C3S for the oblique direction so that we could be working Europe and working over in JA or to the Pacific Northwest at the same time, which I don't think was very common at the time.
So I'm trying to put the map together in my head because I just need to do this. So you're in Arizona now. Sounds like you grew up in California and spent quite a while in California. Is that right?
Yes.
So when did you get to Arizona?
So I was retiring from my old department at the age of 38, and I knew that I had some time, hopefully, in my life to put up some stuff. And I thought at the time, I want to move to Arizona for various reasons and retire out there, change things up from the metropolitan area of Los Angeles quite a bit by going to a rural town that only has 8,000 people and is 45 minutes from the nearest big box store. So I thought, let's put up some Cray cups. That's what I'm used to. That's what I think I can afford. And put some stacks of some JK antennas. Ken's making some great electrically and mechanically sound antennas. Figured this is going to be great. I'll have a rotating 42 element maybe, and we'll see what I can do for receive antennas on 11 acres. However, my good friend Dan has a good way of spending my money, as we joke. He said to me, he says, this is going to be your retirement, QTH, and you really do enjoy contesting, whether it's multis or at the time I was still doing single ops. And he said, why are you going to settle? What is your goal? If this is going to be your forever station, why settle like that? And from there, I started the quest of gathering information from my old Elmers, from guys like Dan and Chris, KL9A, and others that I hadn't met that they put me in contact with. And that became quite the process of delineating information from, why somebody might tell me something and what their background and what their experience is. Where are they in the country? How long have they been having something? Are they holding on to old stuff? Are they willing to try new things? And everybody helped me in that process, whether it was information that I applied here or that I respectfully discarded as not what I'm going to do here.
So the way Dan tells that story, at least part of it, is that following a Dayton Hamvention, you guys were on your way back to your respective homes, and you're at a restaurant, and you guys pulled out a napkin and started redesigning what would eventually be ND7K. Is that just legend, or is that what happened?
Yeah, I think we were also talking about what was going to be happening at ZF1A on that trip at that table too. We got a lot of business done there, I felt like, and we were talking about who the additions to the ZF1A team were going to be, the folks that we met at Dayton. And really glad that we had that conversation, that we opened our minds up to accepting new friends, because one of them, a huge one in that has been very instrumental in adding to this station here, was Bill W9KKN. So, the guys are over in Dayton, I believe this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. They're going to be making lots of friendships and renewing old friendships. But you never know, who's you're going to meet that's going to be so instrumental in your future life from there. But I would say that is correct. We did talk a lot about what would happen here. And we had already been talking a bit, but it was kind of that thing of like, hey, we've kind of heard some new ideas from CTU and from talking to other people. What are we going to do for sure? And what should we do? At that point, it was still a lot of brainstorming.
Well, I appreciate what you just said earlier about getting a lot of different people's opinions and then sorting through it to see what made sense for your station in Arizona, because that's one of the things I'm dealing with 2 years into the hobby. There are a lot of different opinions, and they don't necessarily work in every part of the country, but they also may not work for me. And trying to get to the right answer is not as easy as picking up a book and going to page 6.
No, it's not. And part of that, the unfortunate part about it is we all have egos. And sometimes when you ask a question to somebody and you don't take their advice, you may have some fallback from that. Also, my experience, without dropping any names or of any sort, was that because I was doing something very different than the norm, I actually had some manufacturers that basically said, hey, I'm not sure I'm going to sell you my items. Looking back on that, I think that's from a customer support angle. They're not used to potentially some individuals buying things from them and taking self-ownership of something that doesn't work instead of being blamed for something that doesn't work. So there was some loophole or hurdles. That was a definite thing that I didn't expect to deal with in designing this station, because I don't think it's the norm.
Well, Tim, I want to get into the teamwork that you have with Dan, because I think it's pretty remarkable that you have this fantastic station and you're willing to give it up for every major contest so that Dan can qualify for the WRTC. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Give us an update of what exists there now. for towers and antennas, and particularly inside the shack?
Yeah, so I'm actually pulling up my 3830, the last one we did. I listed all out on 3830. Each contest that we accomplish has a list of what items were used. That's a fallback from when I was first trying to do some SO2R design work and operate SO2R back in the early 2000s. Remember, there was a website that I could go to that showed stations, because this stuff seemed to me to be pretty not commonplace. So I've learned to put my operating conditions on my 3830 just in case somebody wants to know, hey, how'd they make those scores from the equipment side? So on 160, I've basically just got a wire quarter wave vertical. It's got about 60 some odd radials now, most of them full length, some that aren't due to the structures here. 80 meters has got a JK rotatable dipole at 145 feet with the Tornado tuner in the center. That's proven to be an excellent run antenna. Not so good for S&P because of the narrow bandwidth of Mike's tuner. However, that tuner is absolutely amazing for finding a parking spot on 80 meters and running. Because of that, what we found to be a limitation on runnability, we've put up an 80 meter full-size wire vertical with another 60 some odd radials. And that gives us the ability to put in jumpers, depending on the contest, that'll give us the bandwidth to immediately jump somewhere on the search and pounce or in-band side. On 40 meters, I've got K3LR's old 4-element OWAs over here. The element lengths have been redesigned for my heights and soil here. They're at 130 and 70 feet. The lower one's fixed on Europe. The upper one rotates. I've also got two JK404Cs, some shortened 40-meter antennas that are coil loaded, very nice electrically and mechanically. They're at 140 and 70 feet. 70 foot is fixed on JA and that 140 rotates. On 20, I've got a 6/6/6 OWA stacked to Europe at 130, 80, and 40. I designed those and homebrewed them, learning Auto EZ. They're working great. I've got two M² 20 M6s to JA at 130 and 60. And there's a DXE Skyhawk, which is basically a 3-element tribander fixed on South America at 100 feet. On 15, there's a, there's 7/7/7. They're K3LR's old OWAs, so that came this way. They're my European antennas for a 15. They're 120, 90, and 60 fixed. There's a set of, there's a JK 1015 up at 140 feet that gives me 5 elements on 15 that's rotatable. There's a 7/7 OWA stack that I homebrewed to JA at 120 and 90 fixed. A DXE Skyhawk mentioned before to South America at 100. And there's a new homebrewed 15-meter 5L at 80 feet that's filling the gap over to Florida and the Caribbean. On 10 meters, there's an 8/8/8/8 K3LR OWA European stack. They're fixed at 120, 90, 60, and 30. And then a 7/7 M² stack to JA. There's a 1015 at 140 feet from JK again. That gives us 6 elements on 10 meters to search and pounce with and go anywhere we tell it to. And there's a DXE Skyhawk again at South America at 100. And there is a failed attempt at a W4 6-element at 80 feet. That's on my my European 10-meter tower. And there was just too much going on there. Although it was electrically designed well, it is not playing properly. So that will come down when there's a future repair. On receive, there's a receive beverages. They're all 580 feet long and terminated. To Europe, JA, Oceania, and what we call our Eastern beverage to W4 in the Caribbean. And then there are 10, 15, 20, and 40-meter RX verticals made out of half elements from various antenna manufacturers that we use to receive for in-band purposes.
That's quite a list.
That's why I brought up the 3830.
So how long did it take you in years to get to the point you're at now?
Well, it was actually pretty fast. I had access to, a working career of investments that I wasn't afraid to use on this. So basically, In 2019, I believe March of 19, the tower bases were dug along with the anchor bases. And by CQ Worldwide of 2019, we had 60-foot towers up at that time with just some rudimentary antennas slapped up on top of them real quick and some wires hung from them to operate in worldwide CW. Immediately after that, after a big storm passed through and my muddy clay soil dried out, had crane out, I think it was a 90-ton if I'm not mistaken, with all-terrain capability. They came out for a day, put in some work, and Hector XE2K and I put up the rest of the tower heights to 130 feet. All the masts and rotators had been prepared on the ground. They were put up, and some antennas, some of the top antennas got up there, including a 4-element OWA from K3LR. That was a pretty neat thing to watch fly. After that, I coordinated with Hector and started building antennas on site. I wasn't working in a second job or retirement job, if you will, at the time. So I just started building antennas, and each time I would have 3 to 5 antennas ready to go. I'd have Hector come out, and we'd have those fly, sometimes just he and I, sometimes with an additional helper. At this point in time, all that I've basically done over the past year and a half is recover from some storm damage. I did have a microburst hit my property once the towers were nearly filled out. I had some booms fold over on towers, and the crank-up tower I brought from Southern California. It was up and it folded over on itself. This microburst was cyclical winds that had up and down drafts in excess of 100 miles an hour. And so I was very pleased to see how much survived that storm because the towers are designed for just over 100 miles an hour. Most of the antennas are designed for upwards of 130 miles an hour. But you never know what the specs are going to actually do in a storm like that. And I knew if a microburst hit, that an insurance claim would pay out, thankfully. So that's basically what I've done is early 19, and I'd say by 23, all of the antennas that I named were up and going.
That's impressive. So it leads to the question, what are you doing for antenna switching?
Yeah, so that's where Bill, W9KKN, and Jeff, W2FU come in. My Green Heron Everywhere network is very important to me here. I take a lot of surge energy from the monsoon season out here in Arizona. I was well warned about what the lightning situation would be like and the winds. So I have basically designed this so that my northernmost tower, which is 100 feet from my shack, has a 8x4 lean-to that is my equipment shed. In there is all the remotes from GHE, all my bandpass filters, TX switches for the antenna side, etc. And everything other than coax that comes to the shack, where most folks would have control wires and rotor cables, I have a wireless link that is through GHE. My belief there is that I'll take less energy coming to the shack through less opportunities. And so far, I haven't lost anything in the shack to lightning. We do use a MOAS system here from Bill W9KKN, Marty and N1C, K1XM, Paul, everybody's been so instrumental on the backside. I don't have as much communication with them, but to leave them out would be nearly criminal as to how this station's set up with MOAS. Bill's my frontline guy. Thankfully, he donates so much time and energy into making sure that our MOAS is set up well. And the Green Heron Everywhere software gives us the opportunity to switch, to choose transmit antennas. I had K9AY. Gary was employed to make me a great receive switch with bandpass filters and the opportunity to use my antennas without exclusivity on those filters. And so the MOAS controls that, whereas the Green Heron at this time controls all the transmit side.
And what about inside the shack? What are you using for radios?
Inside the shack, we've been very fortunate to get a hold of some ICOMs. ICOM has been had a great relationship and still does with Dan. So we've settled on the 7610s. I pick up 7610s as the budget allows and haven't had one fail yet. It's a great radio for out here. I feel that it's an excellent price point. for what I'm doing. I would love to have 7851s, but that's not in my budget. But so far, that has proven to be our best value radio for this station. As to amplifiers, it's now quite a fleet of Alpha 87s I've been able to pick up used.
So Tim, let's switch to teamwork because I'm really impressed with some of the things you said during the CQWPX wrap up. As I said already, I'm really intrigued to understand the relationship you have with Dan and your willingness to give up such a great station for the major contest and let him operate. But you went a step further in that conversation. You were talking about bringing multi-op teams in and the way you and Dan coordinated those teams and led those teams. It was something, frankly, I haven't heard for quite a while from back in my business days when I was in my 40s, but impressive stuff. But talk to us about your approach to teamwork and leadership in ham radio.
Yeah, so I really believe that nobody can be the best at everything. I think early on in my department time, I was working with installing a computer at my undersheriff's house. I was so young, I didn't understand the gravity of being at the second in command of the largest sheriff's department in the world's house, doing that. But I remember showing up late one day, and he was laughing at me. He's like, kid, I don't think you understand why showing up late isn't a good idea. He let me still come over and complete the task, but he showed me some books, leadership books on his wall, and he said to me, he says, I understand you're probably late because you were interested in something else. But if you're going to be great at something, you got to choose what it is. And you can't be great at too many things. You can be great at one thing. You can be pretty darn good at a second. But if you try to be great at all things, you'll fail. And I have learned to believe that. Our roles on my old department were so vast that you couldn't have one employee know everything. And so we had different tasks that were assigned to us, though we were all generalists all the same. We had to be able to do certain functions. So I believe that when it comes to ham radio contesting, I think that's the best approach. I don't need to know the MOAS as well as Bill. I don't need to know the log research and the operational side of things as well as Dan. I don't need to understand how Jeff put his GHE wireless stuff together so well as to be an expert. But I do have to have a good basis behind all of it, and I need to learn from them about it. So I employ experts to help me. I don't even fathom the ability to be putting together a superstation and understand every aspect. If I thought so, I think I'd be a fool. I had an opportunity to train with the Delta operator at his ranch in Nacogdoches, Texas for a week. It was an instructor school for my old firearms stuff that I used to teach. And he said to me that at the end of every opportunity for them to do either a training mission or a real mission, that each of the team operators would meet these Delta boys. And if somebody during their debrief didn't immediately say what they did wrong, they were basically outcasted. And the purpose wasn't to say, hey, you suck. It was to basically learn and get better. And so I took that also and thought, wow, most people, due to their ego, they don't want to admit their mistakes. They'd rather it almost go uncovered. But then how do you really improve? And so one of the team things that just happened recently is Chris, KL9A, sent us from his WPX multi the log check report, and he backed it up with audio recording, and he let each of us know who was responsible for what error and why. And thankfully, he also said, hey, that mistake Tim made, let's just say I would have made too. That was a tough one. Or, boy, I think Tim was asleep on the job. That one was an easy one. And so it was a real gut check. And I believe that that's something that a team has to do too. And so what I touched on before was that harsh reality that if each guy comes in thinking he's the best, he probably is not. Obviously, there can only be one best. But if each person comes in with a winning attitude and has something to contribute to the team, how can the team fail barring propagation? And so far, that's been a recipe for success.
Well, when you say it this way, Tim, it sounds pretty easy. But you and I both know getting people to set aside their egos is tough. you and I, other team members, but also to be able to be self-critical without pointing fingers. There's a big difference. I mean, if Chris had sent that log and it's like, don't ever do that again, but he did it in a way that apparently was constructive. How do you do that on your teams? Is it selection? Do you select the people that are already predisposed for that, or are you providing training and support to get there, teaching people how to set aside their ego and realize we're all part of a team here? We're going to be critical of each other, but it's meant to be constructive. Which is it, selection or training?
So it's both, but I believe you've got both, but you've got to decide which one's more important for a given event. Such as if we want to set a record, I don't ask Dan to put together a team that we have to train from ground up, obviously. And I trust in him to bring people here that are going to be interested in being here, that he knows about or has trusted confidants that know the person very well. During those events, I don't want people here that are unknown variables that are going to detract from the team. During those times, that's when you're going to hear ND7K on the air. At other times, where we are opening the doors to training, which I think is very important in making sure that the hobby continues, right, and that there's good folks out there, we're not going to use ND7K. It's going to be an opportunity to get on, have fun as the main prerogative, and to train. And so those will be those times where you might hear my personal call or somebody else's personal call being used, because we're not trying to set the standard from the area at that time.
So I'm curious, what do you do when you've brought that person in that isn't part of the A team that you're helping to train, and you're 24 hours into a contest and it's just not working out? What happens?
I think it's just like when I would teach firearms, just let them have fun, be safe and have fun. If somebody doesn't want to progress, they don't want to continue with the training, they're in over their heads, don't be mean by any means, but also realize maybe it's not the time to invest that amount of energy yourself into training somebody. And that's okay. Not everybody's cut out for something, that's for sure. Not everybody's going to be great at something, even though they may want to. But if somebody is here that wants to learn, I don't mind if I don't sleep the entire contest if I'm helping them with something. I love training people, and I love seeing them progress. I want to see them feel great about what they did. I also want to then, say, hey, where do you think you made a mistake going to that old Delta huddle, right? And take that mistake, learn from it, call it out for what it is. I mean, yeah, you messed up, but what can we learn from it? How can we get better? What can we not do that, next time that allows you to be even better? And then I love either having them come back or seeing in their own 3830 write-ups how they got better at something. Whether they give credit this way or not, it doesn't matter. So there's definitely an opportunity to learn in every contest, even during some of our record-setting WPX events here where we do our multi-multi or multi-2 during sideband. Dan asked me, he says, hey, can you not operate? You've had an opportunity to have a cool opening. Yeah, you're the station owner, but I want you to be the training officer right now. And we had a young ham here that needed to pick up on in-band work. And so Dan just said, hey, I want you to Y in with him. And for the next number of hours on 20 meters, I just want you to help him learn what it is to be an aggressive but yet accurate in-band operator. And that operator and I had a lot of fun together. And it's one of my favorite memories of training here at my own station.
So Tim, let's talk about Dan's role that you just got into a little bit. I've heard multi-teams that don't have a person in charge. They sort of communicate through osmosis. They've been doing it for years. And I've heard that recently from some really high-end elite contesters. I've heard Dan and you talk about a kind of a captain being assigned, and it's Dan, that you make it clear from the beginning, Dan's in charge. Talk to me about that philosophy and why that works for you and your team.
You've got a new station here. You've got folks coming that aren't necessarily from this area with the propagation knowledge. There's new antennas being added every time. Bill's always coming up with something wazoo that's even throwing me for a learning curve, obviously, and Dan too. We're talking about it way ahead of time. How do you expect everybody to just operate that fluidly together here? I don't think it can really happen yet. There's not the long-term 20-year veterans here. And so without leadership being in place, a defined leadership role, how do you put, let's just say, K1AR, KL9A, N6MJ, and numerous other operators of that caliber and background together in a room and say, hey, here's a new place for you to operate, make it happen. I think it would happen because they're great operators. They have lots and lots of experience. But would it happen with peak level efficiency without a leadership role being defined? And somebody who, each of those veterans who are amazing operators in their own way, could lean to and say, hey, I'm kind of thinking this, but what's the end decision? You know, I'm going with whatever you say, Dan, because I respect you enough that I'm going to put my own ego aside and go with your plan, even if it's not necessarily what I might do. And so we have to have that, and everybody understands it in advance. And unfortunately, Dan becomes the guy that has the worst time of it because he's the leader. He's the one that's responsible. But we have other guys that have other roles. You know, Bill, W9KKN. Hey, even though Tim put the station together initially, you've added so much. We need you to be available at all times to fix something. You know, that kind of sucks to ask him to do that. You know, the guy would like some sleep. He'd like to be able to operate. But we all have our roles here. And so we give the leadership role to one individual, and that's a job. There's so many other guys that could take it over that come here, obviously, too. You know, if they wanted that job, I would gladly give them that job because I'm glad that Dan has it. And I put a lot of work into onto Dan because of that. And I recognize and respect that. And I think that's what the other guys do too. You know, it's kind of like, hey, I just came out to Arizona. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to be a great teammate. Poor Dan.
So how does Dan handle, or you, a situation where you've got these great operators coming in for a contest and he assigns someone to 20, they're the A team, and someone else travels out and they get assigned to 160 or 80? Is there any sort of pushback, and how do you guys deal with that?
So I believe that really comes into the selection process. Thus far, no. Though there is an incident where Dan and I both feel bad about what we assigned one individual to. And because he's a lifelong friend of mine, he was willing to put up with it. We won't do that again because we really feel that, you know, even though there were younger operators that were more sharp at the time, that at the end of the day, I feel like it was disrespectful in its own way. And so that's something we've learned from. So, you know, there's nothing saying that KL9A might be asked to take 160 for a couple hours so that somebody can have a nice 20-meter European opening that they can have fun with. Will we do that Saturday when we don't know that we're probably going to hit a record? Probably not. Again, that comes with the business aspect of it. But on Sunday, it's a time to say, hey, guys, you know, let's make sure everybody had some fun. We've earned what we've set out to do. Do we need to set the record that much better, or should we reward our operators? And so a shift occurs as that happens.
So let's get into the unique relationship you have with Dan, because I'm really blown away by talking to both of you separately and then together. But Dan, you know, first of all, it's always impressed me that he's willing to say that I'm somewhat of an appliance operator. Because that comes with kind of a negative connotation in ham radio, but he admits that readily. But he's an amazing operator. His skill level, I think, helps make ND7K great. But your ability to design and build and maintain a fantastic station makes Dan great. And I love the symbiotic relationship you guys have when it comes to this. Has that just been because you guys have known each other forever and know how to communicate with each other, or you've set aside your egos? How does that work for you? That, again, I've referred to it a couple times, that you're willing to give up this Superstation for a major contest to your buddy Dan so he can break records.
Dan and I have known each other since probably 15 or more years, if I'm recalling correctly. We just happened to live in the same city in Southern California together. And he saw, I think, probably a 3830 or an SCCC post that I did, and he reached out. And at that time, Kevin, I was like, who's N6MJ and why would I want to talk to him? Uh, uh, and that comes from it's wrong to say, why would I want to talk to, but it's more like, God, I'm busy. I've got kids. I've got the job. I've got a side business. I've got this radio contesting. Do I put a time slice in life to respond and go out and get some pizza with the guy? And I'm so glad I did. And I'm sure he feels the same way. We talk about it and joke like, geez, if we hadn't gone out and gotten pizza, would we have this station here? And notice how I say we. It has become a we. So Dan is somebody who, he might text me, hey, if you do the following in your personal life, I'm going to remind you it's wrong. And I take that and I'm like, yeah, I need you to. And when he does something, likewise, and maybe even in radio, I'll be able to tell him, hey, you need to think about something here. Think about how they took that. We have that relationship together. I don't know that we're ever going to bother each other enough to not talk again, So when it comes to the station, Dan, is he an appliance operator compared to some guy that's putting up radio towers and climbing and fixing his own antennas or at least inspecting them and bringing out a Tower Pro? Yeah, Dan is. Dan's also one of the top operators in the world that most guys who maintain their own station are not. So to call him that and actually mean by it, that's just dumb. And a big self-ego check that somebody should take. I am not interested whatsoever in doing what Dan does on the radio, though I have a station that it can be done from. My role that I self-set is to maintain this place so that people want to come out here. And then I allow others to help me in setting teams. I don't know everybody like Dan and Chris does. I don't want to. I have other things in life I want to do. Doesn't mean they're wrong for it. Doesn't mean I'm wrong for it. I just recognize that we all have expertises. And so Dan has an excellent pedigree of his background, and he's a great non-confrontational guy. He's able to bring people out here that would probably never come out here if N6WIN invited them. And I recognize that. So to allow Dan to put together the teams, it's a no-brainer. To have Dan as the team captain with all of his experience in operation, it's a no-brainer. I have, like I said, there's other people that have other roles that are so important along with that. For Dan coming out here and operating and qualifying for WRTC, I met him qualifying for WRTC from Jim W6YIs, and Jim was giving up his station to him. That was like, hey, if you have a great station, great operators are going to want to come and operate. And what better thing to show off your station than one of the best operators in the world? I would not be setting the same records he is. I wouldn't come close. I'm not that kind of operator, but I do have a guy that will come here and set those records. So for me, it's just as much of a victory personally and for the station here as it is for Dan. So we get along great on that aspect. And we're both constantly talking about what improvements need to be made, what went wrong. He's right to look at me and say, Tim, you didn't have this set up right for me. I don't take offense by that. Likewise, if he's a bit sleepy and he didn't take the day off of work before coming out, I tell him, hey, man, you need to take the day off. If you're going to be the top operator here, you've got to apply yourself. And we hold each other accountable like that. And I believe that's a big part of what is happening out here.
Tim, I'm looking at the clock and realizing I need to wrap this up soon for your sake. One big last question, though. What does the future of ham radio look like in your opinion?
Well, I hope there's continuing people in Asia getting on the radio, or we're going to have a tough time putting up big scores from this station. I see people plenty of the time on FT8, and I think that's great that people are engaged. It's just like stuff I come from, you want more people to be involved in what you do so that your ability to do so is protected. The FCC could always take away rights and all of that kind of, or not rights, but the ability for us to do what we do and give it to others. So it's great to see that people are on. I think like most, I hope that people get on Morse code and sideband more often. But I'm guilty of the same thing. I have other interests in life, and I'm not on very often, besides the contests, actually. So I'm hopeful that just as we take in somebody like a youth operator, we try to bring a youth out here for contests, even if it's a major one that we want to set a record. I hope that other people do that, and they continue to make people excited like my Elmers did, and that those people that dabble into contesting find good operators out there that are willing to help them through exchanges. Big thing that we do here during the WPX multi is what Dan jokingly calls the friendship net on 40 meters. And what he does is he has me basically on Sunday sit down for numerous hours and conversationally work guys into wanting to call ND7K to make a QSO. We have so many uniques in our log checking report. It's like ridiculous. The just rows and rows of those uniques that come from 40 meters. And I just have a lot of fun. I have a partner usually. Now, imagine this, a two-man operation conversationally making cues. I've got somebody, a well-seasoned op like K7ZO, Scott sitting next to me, pulling up QRZ saying, "Hey man, look at that antenna." And I'll be like, "So Kevin, I see that you just got a remote station out there. Well, those antennas, or if it's, a young man working from Virginia, wow, what an amazing G5RV. And I'll crack a joke. Man, you're doing the heavy lifting here, buddy. It's a good thing you got that antenna, going with your 5 watts so we can make this QSO. And guys just have a lot of fun with it. It takes a lot of my vocal cords away. But I get emails after that, man, you were just so fun to talk to in the contest. I'm so used to the business-like aspect. I didn't call your counterpart on the West Coast because they were just, hitting the, auto, whatever that you guys do. They just sound robotic, and you were having fun with it. Now, we can't do that during a big 20-meter opening of Europe out here. That's for sure. We'd be wasting time. But we do things like that to encourage people to have fun with contesting and to learn about contesting. I'll take 4 or 5 minutes during that to explain how to make this QSO through via, what we got to do for the contest, but in a way that makes a guy say like, wow, I just wanted to check my signal report, but I'm happy to give you a number 1. Heck, I don't even like contesters, but I like you guys. So, hopefully people are having fun so that people continue having fun and want to learn about our hobby, and they're there and using the radio waves.
Well, Tim, in my humble opinion, it's going to be guys like you with approaches like yours that are the future of ham radio. Thank you for your contribution to the hobby.
And thanks for having me on, Kevin. This is a wonderful podcast. I've enjoyed watching nearly every episode thus far.
I've been talking to Tim Coker N6WIN. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, sir.